Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and I thank warmly the Royal Society of Edinburgh for providing me with the opportunity to set out my aspirations in government as we approach St Andrew's Day. This esteemed building, the gathering place of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, is the perfect place to discuss the challenges that we face as a nation and how we can best address them together. Day in and day out, fellows of the Royal Society share their expert knowledge and independent advice with policymakers, with the purpose of growing, exploring and sharing knowledge for a thriving Scotland. A precursor to academies and Royal Societies was the Republic of Letters, which developed across Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. Long before emails and video conferencing, this vast network of correspondence shared knowledge and discovery through an endless number of letters and visits. Through all this correspondence and discussion, the Republic of Letters sped the advancement of the public good. They developed deeper understandings of the problems of their day. They found a shared approach to tackling those problems, and they increased the speed of society's advancement. I'd like to speak to you today about the shared approach that lay at the heart of that early communication. Having recently marked 6 months in office as First Minister, and as we look towards the publication of our budget next week, this feels like an ideal moment to set out my style of government. Firstly, let me say that every day in office is an extraordinary privilege. No 2 days are the same, some, not surprisingly, are more challenging than others. But every single day, I meet inspirational people from all walks of life. People who are doing their bit to make their communities, their businesses or their country better today than it was yesterday. When added together, those efforts form the engine of progress that is driving our country forward. For me, unlocking that potential is what government is all about. It's about creating the conditions for every single person in Scotland to thrive. And it means thinking carefully about what kind of country we seek to build. I believe Scotland would be best served by a robust, resilient, well-being economy, one that promotes economic and social equality and decarbonises our communities, one that values the health and the happiness of its people as much as their productivity. So when I accepted the role of First Minister, I stated there were 4 priorities behind which I would throw the whole weight of my government: eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, tackling the climate crisis, and improving public services. I chose those priorities carefully. Clearly, they are not mutually exclusive, and taken together, delivering on them puts Scotland on a path to a sustainable and a prosperous future for all. But I also recognise that government cannot do this alone. So rather, I favour an approach much like the correspondence in the Republic of Letters long ago, and much like the universities and research institutions of today. Scotland is best served when we collaborate, when we build consensus and work together across sectors and across disciplines and across cultures. The need to do so has never been more urgent, for the issues that we are now facing are complex, pervasive and entrenched, and they are mounting. In the last 7 years, we've seen global challenges stacked upon global challenges, from Brexit and COVID to international conflicts, economic crises and climate disasters. On top of this, we've seen domestic problems like delayed discharge and the availability of housing become more and more acute due to rapidly increasing need in our society. I've referred to this before as a long, dark winter, because for most people, it's increased uncertainty, anxiety and hardship. So the question I'm addressing as First Minister is, how do we now prepare the ground for spring? As a society, we expect, not wrongly I would argue, for our leaders and our government to have a deep understanding of the issues of the day. We expect them to grasp the root causes and the complexity of those issues, enough to find the right solutions not merely the quick and the easy ones. Yet too often, and particularly in politics, discussions in the public discourse are dominated by surface solutions because they are the few that can gain consensus. Because the hard work of finding true consensus, of peer-reviewing ideas in good faith, can feel unrealistic in this, our increasingly polarised reality. In a year that's seen more people take part in elections than ever before across the globe, the outcomes have seen a lurch to the right. Because when things are difficult, it is natural that people want a direct and an immediate response. They want their fears and their problems to go away. But history and the example of the Republic of Letters tell us that we must resist that urge. We must maintain enough hope and energy to work together to understand the root causes and the complexity of problems and to find the right solutions. These solutions may not always be quick, they may not always be easy, but that does not make them any less necessary. This then is the approach that people should expect from a Swinney government. I don't believe in trying to solve problems from the top down. Rather, I believe they need to be solved from the bottom up. I'm not here to dictate from on high to those on the front line. I'm prepared to roll my sleeves up and the sleeves of my government to properly understand barriers to progress and to find solutions. And in identifying those solutions, I'm not looking for popular quick fixes or sticking plasters. I'm here to do the hard work, to lay the foundations for lasting improvements to our country, our economy, and our society. I don't pretend that this style of government is always headline grabbing, but I do believe it is effective. And in the long run, I know the results will speak for themselves. Let me give you a few examples of this approach and how it is now paying off. Delayed discharge in our hospitals is an issue which is never far from the headlines, and rightly so. Delayed discharge is a canary in the coal mine for our National Health Service. It tells us that the flow of people through hospital is not happening as it should, that people are not getting the right care in the right place. That causes pressure everywhere else in our system. If we can tackle this issue, we can drive improvements in care across our whole system and provide better care for everyone. The public discourse around delayed discharge focuses on the national picture, where the numbers are, of course, far too high. But that masks the fact that in some areas, delayed discharge is in fact very rare. So to understand it nationally, we must understand why some parts of Scotland are successful and support others to replicate that success elsewhere. That is the focus of my government. We're working with areas with high levels of delay to understand their challenges. And we're drawing in expertise to deliver the right changes for them. It looks different in different parts of Scotland, but we know there is excellent practice out there, and we want to share it. I would characterise this approach as the activist government that I expect to see. Another example is in housing and planning. Here, we're working with house builders, local authorities and businesses to understand what precisely is blocking the delivery of homes on specific sites across Scotland. This will enable us to identify the concrete actions that will more practically support development. While planning is not responsible for the housing emergency, our fully devolved planning system and the planning profession are well placed to offer solutions. For example, we're about to introduce new master planning powers that will enable planning authorities to take a proactive lead and grant planning permission up front. This will support a collaboration over conflict approach and help us to move past some of the cross-sector issues that are too common in our planning system. We cannot fix the systemic blockers to housing overnight, but we can and should work together to cut through entrenched positions and find positive solutions. And then there is the transition to a net zero economy. This requires us to redesign huge parts of our society and systems that have existed for generations. It also takes unprecedented levels of investment. Here again, my government is looking to take a collaborative, ground-up approach. Through work with the Scottish National Investment Bank and regional enterprise agencies, we are jump-starting private investment in renewables and filling gaps in capital available to businesses. We're introducing planning reforms and allocating more resource to consenting. All of this is incentivising renewable industries to invest in Scottish communities, and industry has powerfully responded. This is how Scotland became home to the world's first floating offshore wind farm. It is how Sumitomo's cable factory investment came to the Highlands, and how the major redevelopment project at Ardesir Port has been secured with Haventus. Focused use of public investment to secure significant private sector investment is therefore a key intervention of my government. Around this room, we see portraits of eminent women scientists from Scotland. Even 100 years ago, an exhibition of anything other than male scientists would have been a scandal. A particular delight about this exhibition is that all of the descriptions of these eminent women scientists are both in English and in Gaelic, which demonstrates the commitment of the Royal Society to nurture and to support the development of the Gaelic language, which is enormously welcome. This exhibition and what it demonstrates proves that progress on inequality can be made in our society. I want us to make progress in one aspect of our society above all else in terms of equality. I want every child, male or female, growing up in Scotland to have an equal chance to prosper and to thrive. To do that, we must end child poverty, and that is why it is my foremost priority in government. There are many setbacks in this journey. There are many milestones still to be reached when it comes to equality. But just look around this room and see how far we have come. Yesterday, Social Security Scotland announced that we've reached the milestone of paying £1 billion to support families through our 5 family payments. I'm proud of the impact these payments are having on reducing child poverty. But the fact that we need to make these payments, the fact that we will continue to make these payments, shows that as impactful as they are, the root of the problem goes far deeper. I hear time and again that services don't speak to each other, that the effort needed to navigate them is exhausting. Frontline staff tell me they struggle to help people the way that they ideally would want to help people. Councils tell me they're constrained by numerous small pockets of funding, all with strings attached. In my programme for government, I committed to introducing more flexibility in how services can be designed and resources pooled so as to better support the families who need them most. So we're committed to collaboration between national and local governments and with community partners. Together, we can redesign systems that are integrated, locally responsive, and focused on improving lives. There are already so many examples of best practice to learn from in places like Glasgow, Dundee and Clackmannanshire. And in next week's budget, we will set out the important next steps we will take to support this reform. And we will prioritise the funding and the investment needed to build on the progress that I have mentioned. This budget will be a statement of our intent to deliver real and lasting progress for Scotland. Despite a difficult fiscal context, we will focus our every effort on delivering not only the quick solutions, but the right solutions. And that ultimately will prevent the need for greater investment further down the line. There is, of course, an important point to the budget process, which strikes at the very heart of the message that I'm setting out in this venue today. In a parliament of minorities, no political party is a mere bystander in the budget process. More appropriately, they should be seen as partners. Certainly, that is how I have always seen them in my many years of negotiating budget bills, and I hope that is how they see themselves. But a partnership does, of course, come with increased responsibility. Collaboration is only effective if it leads to progress being delivered. Opposition for opposition's sake is all well and good where governments have comfortable majorities. But put simply, in the Scottish Parliament today, if there is no collaboration, then there is no budget bill. As we've prepared this year's budget, we've engaged extensively with Civic Scotland. We've listened to our business community about the barriers they face, but also the enormous future opportunities that we can help unleash with the decisions we make. We've engaged in the substantive dialogue that I promised with local government, and we've brought together public authorities, philanthropists and voluntary organisations to find common solutions. And we've given great consideration to suggestions from other political parties in a wide range of policy areas. Next week's budget will bear the fruits of that collective, collaborative effort. And when the Finance Secretary, Shona Robison, presents the budget, my challenge to the other members of the Scottish Parliament is this. We can choose to be mired in party politics, or we can choose to put first and foremost our duty to the people we represent. We can act with wisdom in the collective good. We can advance the prospects of the people of Scotland, but only if we are prepared to reach agreement to do so. When I look at the wealth of hard work and talent around our country, I'm optimistic, confident even, that Scotland has the agility, ideas and audacity to achieve further real progress. Scotland is a community in which we can readily, physically and metaphorically come together. That can happen in a devolved Scotland. I believe we'd be able to achieve much more with the full powers of an independent country. But what we can do is use our position as Scotland's national government to bring people together to tackle complex, systemic problems such as child poverty. We can bring leaders and officials closer to communities. And unlike the correspondence of the Republic of Letters, we don't have to wait weeks for a letter to arrive by coach. We can more easily walk through communities ourselves, speak to people, and understand firsthand the issues that affect them. This is particularly important in a country like Scotland, where the picture in the Central Belt can be so different to the picture in the Borders or the Highlands or in our islands. Being closer to our communities also makes it easier for us to bring those communities into policy making, government, from the ground up. And as the persistence of child poverty shows, that collaboration is not only important, it is essential. We need local government, public institutions, businesses and people to keep this country running. We need them every bit as much as we need an effective central government. So as the Republic of Letters pioneered open science, we must pioneer open dialogue. We must break down entrenched silos and invite people into government. Nothing significant in public policy will ever come from a siloed, protectionist approach to policy making. We must focus on outcomes, on impact and on delivery, so that everyone in Scotland can feel the warmth of spring once again. Voltaire, the French philosopher and prolific contributor to the Republic of Letters, wrote this: "We look to Scotland for all of our ideas of civilization." Yes, Scotland offered those ideas, but at that time, Scotland was far from the pinnacle of civilization. It was home to staggering poverty and inequality. Now, we've come far from that time, and we must now be ready to work to make the progress I hope for and know Scotland is capable of. The Republic of Letters sparked a period of scientific and political advancement. It was a tremendous step forward for civilization. It gave birth to the Enlightenment. If that's the scale of what can be achieved by letters, imagine what we can do with the inventiveness, creativity and the talent that we have available to us. Scotland, without doubt, has that strength and ingenuity. So will we continue to be entrenched in our silos, blaming the other, waiting for the seasons to change, or will we choose to advance together with renewed purpose? The people I've met in Scotland as First Minister, the people I've met in my 27 years to date as a parliamentarian, want us to do that in Scotland. In the period to come, I hope we can respond with generosity to the challenge that the people of Scotland have put before us. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take some questions from our guests here today before I come to some of the broadcast questions that will come to, and then I'll speak to the print media a little bit later on as well. So can I invite some questions from our guests today who'd like to put some points to me before we move on to the journalistic questions? Yes.
Hi, Professor Gary Kerr, co-chair of the Academy of Scotland. The higher education sector in Scotland is very challenged at the moment because of a series of decisions made by consecutive UK governments. Is there anything that the Scottish Government can do to support Scottish universities in the current climate?
Thanks very much, Garen. I think the point is well made, given the abrupt adjustments that universities are having to make to the issues around employer national insurance contributions as a most recent issue, and obviously there's some very challenging questions for individual institutions such as the University of Edinburgh about the supercomputer project, which has been a real change of direction from the UK government. What we've tried to do and what we'll continue to do is to work collaboratively with the university sector. We'll have budget commitments to set out in the course of next week. But what we also will do is use the investment resources that we have to work closely with universities on the development of new possibilities within the economy. So when I look at some of the gains that have been made within the Scottish economy just now, a large number of them are being driven by the ideas and concepts emerging from our universities, which are then supported by our startup ecosystem, and now increasingly by the Tech Scaler programme, which has been, I think will turn out to be one of the most formidable interventions we have made in this whole area of policy. So I would give that as an illustration of how I would like to work. And my speech today, Gary, has been very much about how I intend to work. It's not setting out the details of the budget. That would get me into terrible trouble if I did that today. But what it is doing is setting out an invitation, a prospectus to others in our society, be they, in your case, universities or other political parties, if it comes to a budget agreement, or to community organisations, to volunteer organisations, or to our partners within local authorities. What I'm trying to do is to create a space for common progress in Scotland. And my long experience in government, common progress doesn't come from one wee compartment over there. It comes by bringing people together and drawing on the strengths of what people can draw together in that creative process. And that invitation is very much available to universities. And I have to say, again, in my experience, the university community is hungry to fulfil that role, and it's welcome. Thank you. Yes. There's a microphone just coming to you.
Poonam Malik, the co-chair for the New Deal for Business with DFM and the Fellow of Royal Society. So welcome to this August building. Thank you, First Minister, for your very inclusive and sort of coming together, breaking silos talk. I think for the business community, that will be music to the ears, because for where we want to go, I suppose that collaboration both with the private sector and the UK government will be critical. One of the challenges that everybody is facing is sort of shortage of funds everywhere. So everybody is understandable of the budget that has come as sort of thrown challenges for the businesses, but also what the future may entail on the 4th of December. The question I'm thinking about is that how is the government ensuring that Scotland takes advantage of the additional funding from private investors that can come here to the large-scale projects, be it infrastructure, be it early-stage scaling companies, through the collaboration and the mansion house reforms, the pension funds, as well as the challenges that the business community is facing, and the opportunity on the other hand that the early stage entrepreneurship, new job creation that presents it. So I think that discussion will be very useful for people to hear for that forward-thinking views.
Thanks so much, Pooran, and thank you for the welcome to the Royal Society. I'm profoundly grateful to the Royal Society for hosting this discussion this morning. I think I am very keen to make sure that government utilises the investment resources it has available to help to encourage greater private investment in our economy. If I take, for example, the project at Ardasir Port, which is led by Haventus, it's a classic example of what I would be keen to achieve. Yes, there is very significant private sector investment, but government investment through the Scottish National Investment Bank and the British Business Bank has de-risked that investment project. So a site that has lain vacant for the best part of probably 20 years, if not longer, is now going through a whole process of regeneration and redevelopment with to anchor the developments in offshore renewable energy off the coast of Scotland. Now, to me, that illustrates the nature and the style of investment propositions that we've got to bring together, where government has a role to play in bringing risk-assessed investment, but which private companies can respond to. Now, the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, is leading the government's work on investment and engaging in a huge amount of dialogue across a whole range of different sectors to fundamentally marshal that proposition, that we are keen, energetic, enthusiastic to put in place what I would call a jigsaw picture of funding. It's maybe the best way to put it. But crucially, there is a convening role for government to make that happen. Now, I can think of a number of developments, particularly that the Scottish National Investment Bank has been involved in, which I think if you'd looked at them as straightforward private sector capital investments, they might have struggled to get over the line. But what the Scottish National Investment Bank has successfully been able to do is to de-risk those projects to then enable investment to take its course. And that's the model that Kate will be taking forward on our behalf. And I suppose what I would say is that we are, we are open to sharing that message very widely. And both Kate and I are involved, and a number of other ministers, a whole range of discussions with investors to enable that message to be understood and also to put in place the practical steps to enable development to happen. There are, of course, other things other than money that the government can bring to the equation. We can bring alignment around skills. We can bring alignment around efficient consenting and planning processes, which are reasonable expectations in any world for there to be in case. So it's not just about money and investment is obviously important, but it's about more than that. I think the last observation I would make is that there is, if I go back again, 20 years, Scotland, the commentary in the news media would be the fact that Scotland had a problem with the number of start-up businesses we had in our country. That issue's gone. Our ecosystem, working with ingenuity and creativity within the Scottish economy, has resolved that issue. What we're now focused on is how do we generate greater scale and capacity and global footprint as a consequence of the tech scalar intervention is, I think, a formidable ally in that respect. So I think we are positioning the interventions of government to reach a much wider level of success than we could ordinarily hope for. Yes, there's a microphone down here, just in front of you there, Jack. Scroll on.
Thank you, First Minister. Mark Crothall from the Scottish Tourism Alliance. I've spent the last week and a half out on the road around the industry, and obviously I saw you on Thursday night at our Thistle Awards, and thank you very much for your attending that. And just to, I guess, your point of the Scottish National Investment Bank, you referenced the surf resort at Lost Shore. I guess from our sector, there is real concern right now. Pre the UK budget, we conducted a recent survey which highlighted 45% of the respondents having less than 3 months cash liquidity. We're a very aspirational industry. We want to be world leaders in 21st century tourism. We work very collaboratively. And we're also an industry that is committed to community as well. So my fear is we're at a tipping point now where our competitiveness on price and quality is reaching its absolute optimum. So what can we do, or what can your government do to ensure that warmer conditions to enable that success and that investment to transition to net zero, to deliver more and compete on a global stage is there? We have demand, but the real fear is now that we're going to lose the product. And so it's a tipping point. Appreciate money's not always there, but there are other solutions. Planning is one which you've identified, and with a visitor levy coming to be potentially led on top, we are not going to be the country that's looked upon for the right reason when it comes to our price points and the way in which we go about some of our policy decisions.
I think, well, thanks, Mark, and obviously, well, I greatly appreciated the event on Thursday night, because I thought, as a demonstration of the quality and the strength of the Scottish tourism industry, it was absolutely formidable. So it was great to see that, and to see the optimism and the commitment, and particularly the commitment to sustainable tourism, learning the lessons of the whole approach to net zero. So I suppose that my response to what you'd say, what you've put to me, is that we have to have a variety of interventions which are supportive and complementary to the growth and development of the tourism industry. So, so first thing I'd say is that open dialogue, of hearing you, is really important. So that's the first thing. And I know well, Richard Lockhead, the Tourism Minister, was with me at the event on Thursday night. So knowing how Richard goes about his business, I think he'll be pretty engaged with you, so you'll be able to put your point of view across to him. And that's got to be understood and heard within government, and we've got to adapt to those challenges. So that's the first thing, we've got to listen and hear you. The second thing is that we've got to be prepared to look at a range of policy approaches that might be of assistance, whether that's about skills development or infrastructure development, which would assist the industry. And we've also got to be prepared to look at investment resources. So the surfing resort development is a, you know, I can remember looking at that project from the Scottish National Investment Bank thinking, well, this is bold, and it certainly is bold, but it's a really, I think it'll prove to be incredibly successful. So we have to have imagination to look at how we can align resources to support developments of that type. So there's an open willingness to do that and to address what will be challenging economic conditions. But with the right investment, I think people are prepared to participate in an industry of quality, and there's no lack of aspiration in the tourism industry to be an industry of that type. Yes.
Thanks. Chris Burke from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. You talked, First Minister, about elections that have happened around the world and how we've seen politics shift a bit. And some of that is connected to people being, as you've said, disillusioned or feeling disconnected from political arguments. As you know, there are literally thousands of people in our country today who are hungry and who are cold, and who for spring feels an awful long way away. So what you've set out in your approach to government, how do you make that feel real to people? To feel connected, to feel like that warmth is coming to every home in Scotland?
Well, there's got to be, well, I think the way I try to describe it, Chris, is perhaps to explain and to reassure people of my understanding of the difficulty, because I do understand that people feel it's been a pretty long, dark winter, and I'm not just, you know, and we're only at the start of it, but we've had 7 years of very, very challenging conditions on the back of a climate of austerity which has led to real acute suffering. Now, I've been very candid about the necessity for public investment, and we've taken decisions in the Scottish Government to enable that to happen, and I think there are more interventions in Scotland today to try to address some of the issues that you talk about in relation to the difficulties that people face, but there is more that we need to do, and we will do, to address that. But I think what we've also got to recognise is the importance of putting the practical steps in place that make a difference to families that face difficulty and face that hardship. So I was struck, I've been struck by how quickly we were able as a society to address many of the issues that you talked about during the COVID pandemic, because we essentially got the support to people that they needed. That was the question that was answered. What's the, I can remember listening to public servants in my own community, discussing with members of the public, what is it you need to get you through this period? And it was delivered. Why should that just be in a pandemic? Because if I look at us now, today, I think too many public organisations have retreated into the transactional ways in which we did things in the past. So the whole nature of what I've tried to do in the 6 months in which I've been First Minister has been to try to rebuild some of the ways of working that would enable us to create those conditions where we actually meet needs within our society. So that's about breaking down barriers, it's about lining up support alongside families who are facing difficulty, helping them through those challenges, family by family, because that model to me is the model that works. Now, when I cite in my speech the examples of approaches in Clackmannanshire, Dundee and Glasgow, some of the results in these projects are utterly formidable. They demonstrate what can be done. So the question, so if I link that point to my bright spots of performance on delayed discharge around the country, it demonstrates that real outcomes, good beneficial outcomes can be achieved. The problem is they're not being achieved in every locality in the country. So the whole theme of my speech today is about joining up Scotland to make sure we deploy our resources and our interventions to make a difference in people's lives. And that's what we've got to do. So what's happening in these particular projects in Glasgow, Dundee and Clackmannanshire, I want to see reflected in the approach in every community in the country. And I have to say, in response to the agenda that I set out in the programme for government in September, we are getting and hearing and experiencing a positive response and engagement to that from organisations around the country. Crucial in that will be the role of many third sector organisations, because they will be able to make those connections very directly with individuals. And I think that's how we build that support to help people to feel the warmth of spring. But it's got to be done in a way that reaches people, and we need to make those connections very directly. I think I'll take this gentleman here, and then I think I'll probably have to move on to broadcasters at that stage. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bernard Blumenau, Young Academy of Scotland and University of St Andrews. First Minister, you mentioned the many challenges we are facing, and climate change, conflict, and pandemics are just some of them, and how we need to collaborate and cooperate in order to face them. So I was wondering if you could say a few words about what role does Europe play in your plans for the future for Scotland?
Well, I'd like Europe to play a much more significant part in our future than it currently is looking like it's playing, to be honest. It's not really, it won't be a surprise to anybody here that I deeply, deeply, deeply regret the Brexit process. It's now obviously doing huge damage to economic well-being in our country and economic opportunity. And I think it's a travesty that such a damaging factor is not resulting in a change of direction in relation to the core problem, which is the decision to leave the European Union. So my plea would be, in the new political context and environment that we are in, and I've made this plea to the new United Kingdom government, of the importance of us rebuilding relationships. I'd dearly love us to rejoin the European Union. If that's not on the table, then could we perhaps please address some of the impediments and issues? So questions about youth and student mobility need to be addressed. I'm very there's a very wide agreement within Scotland, amongst political parties, amongst universities, amongst the business community, that measures around youth mobility and free movement of people are really elementary elements of how we need to strengthen our relationship. And I hope we can make progress on these questions. I'm disappointed that what I think are perfectly credible and rational offers from the European Union have not been seized by the new United Kingdom government. I hope they might do that in due course. There also, we need to ease the process of trade with Europe. I was just in conversation with a business on Monday who were just going through to me the competitive difficulty, the competitive and comparative difficulty of doing business with Europe in their sector today than pre-Brexit, which is a huge competitive disadvantage. And although some of the research collaborations between our universities and European universities have been able to be maintained and nurtured, they are not powering as much as they were in the past. So I do hope we can have a climate that enables us to rebuild some of those relationships, because I see Europe as central to the aspirations that we take forward in relation to our economic and social prospects as a country. Right, I better move on to well, I'll take this one last question and then I'll move on to broadcasters. Yes.
Really, this is not a question, but really I want to take this opportunity to thank Scotland, because I came from Syria as Carafolo and now I'm a young academy in Scotland. So, yeah, thank you so much for Scotland, for University of Glasgow, for everyone, for supportive that I see in this country, because I secure my life, my family life here. So thank you so much. And thank you for receiving an email that please come and this invitation to come today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your reflections with us, and you're very welcome, and thank you for the contribution you're making to Scotland and to the Royal Society of Edinburgh. One of the bright spots of life in the last few weeks, and I would say this is one of my examples of the signs of spring, is a collaboration between the Scottish and United Kingdom governments that have secured the safe journey of 19 Afghan female medical students who were partway through their medical degrees in Afghanistan before the Taliban said that women were to no longer pursue education, which is, you know, when I listen to these women, the absurdity of that stance is just incomprehensible, particularly when you see, you know, in this environment with all these portraits around about us. But because of a good collaboration between the Scottish and United Kingdom governments, the Linda Norgrove Foundation, and 19 courageous women who've taken one heck of a risk to make the journey to Scotland to continue their education, these women are now going to complete their medical degrees at the universities of Glasgow, Edinburgh, St Andrews, Dundee and Aberdeen. So there are good, bright things that we can do in this conflicted world, in the absurdity of decision-making that the Taliban and others make. And thank you very much for your contribution today and for the warmth of your welcome. Right, I better get on to the broadcasters. So we'll come to Lindsay Bewes first from BBC Scotland. Lindsay.
Thank you, First Minister. You've talked a lot this morning about understanding the practical issues that are facing people. You've talked about building consensus and about collaboration. There's been calls from both inside and outside the Scottish Parliament for you to take action on winter fuel payments. Are you now prepared to look at using your powers, your finances, to reinstate those payments for Scottish pensioners who are now missing out?
I thought that the decision arrived at by the UK government in the summer was the wrong decision. I made it clear, and I've called on the UK government to reverse that decision. We obviously had a budget cut which went directly with that particular decision, and the government has been looking at all of these issues for some time, because we recognise the seriousness of the situation that is faced by pensioners in Scotland, given the more, the colder climate here, and also the necessity for support. So, as you've probably gathered, there's a statement to Parliament tomorrow which will set out the government's response to some of these challenges. And I certainly want to make sure, as I've said in my speech today, that the government does as much as it can to address the practical challenges and issues that people face in their lives. And as part of the government's consideration of this issue, we'll set out tomorrow exactly what we're going to do in response. Colm Mackay.
Just ahead of that tomorrow, without giving anything away, can you confirm that you are going to help older people with their fuel bills over the course of this winter? You said it's going to be a long, dark winter. It's already a cold winter.
Obviously, this is an issue that has attracted real concern from people around the country. I think it was an unnecessary move that was made. I cannot fathom the logic behind the move that was made by the United Kingdom Government, but it involved a reduction in our budget to which we've had to take time to respond. So you'll understand the constraints under which I operate. There's a parliamentary statement tomorrow. Parliament has to hear the news about the government's plans first, and that's what ministers will set out to Parliament tomorrow. But what I'm certain of is that the government I lead must be a government that stands and offers support to those who face challenges in our society, stands alongside those who are able to take forward opportunities. And that's exactly what will govern and dictate our approach on all of the issues that we face. Peter McMahon.
Thank you, First Minister. First Minister, you said in your speech, I'm not here to dictate from on high to those on the front line. Now, when we speak to councillors in the Priest and Galloway Council or Scottish Borders Council, they might use more polite language, but they will feel that your government has effectively dictated to them. For example, on the council tax freeze, the way the council tax funding is structured. And as I understand, a suggestion that there could be a similar system to force councils to cap the council tax next year. So could you say to those councils and councillors of all parties, you won't dictate to them and you'll let them make their financial decisions and be accountable to their local electorate?
I think everyone should be accountable to the electorate that chooses them. I feel very accountable to the electors that have chosen me, and I follow that through at all times. I went to the COSLA conference in earlier on this year, and I pledged that there would be real and substantive engagement with local government in advance of the formulation of the government's budget on December the 4th. And whatever is said about the government and what it's done, I don't think there will be a single local authority leader in the country that can say anything other than I've fulfilled my promise to have real and substantive dialogue with local government. That has been extensive. I've engaged in much of that dialogue myself directly, personally, to make sure that we have a proper understanding of the challenges that face local government and that we do all that we can to address them. So that is important as a reflection of what I've set out in my speech, that I recognise the need for us to work collaboratively with other public authorities. I had in one of the other substantive pre-budget discussions that I've had around the Cabinet table in Butte House was with a whole range of different interested parties. Police Scotland were with me, local authorities, third sector organisations, philanthropists, our health boards, working out how we can address the point that Chris Burt raised with me about how do we join up the country to make an impact on people's lives. So those very practical, engaged conversations to try to change the discourse in Scotland are very much what I'm trying to do, and local government has been central to my plans in that respect. James Cook. James.
Morning, First Minister. A lot of what you've talked about there in terms of dealing with this dark winter, as you put it, seems to me to be dependent on raising enough funds in taxation through a growing economy to fund public services. So two things on that. At the very least, the efficacy of your income tax policy is debatable. Your party's been promising to reform or replace the council tax for nigh on 2 decades. A, is it time for a root and branch reform of taxation, or review rather, of taxation in Scotland? And B, I noticed there was no mention, I don't think a single mention of independence in your speech. Is it possible for Scotland to enjoy the warmth of spring, as you put it, without becoming independent?
Well, on the last point, I'm afraid your keen eye has, or your keen ear has let you down, James, because there was not for the first time, but I just say that as a matter of factual correction, not of any sense of holding you to account. But yeah, look, I think Scotland would prosper if the gentleman's question to me about Europe is resolved by Scotland becoming an independent country. And that's the only way I'm looking at the debate about Europe and their interaction, looking at this spectacular own goal of economic damage and a blight of social and economic opportunity in our country. And nobody's prepared to do anything about it, apart from my politics, which is about independence in Scotland, resuming her natural place at the heart of Europe. So independence, to me, is the way in which we can address these challenges to the full. But I'm facing the world as it is in front of me today, as First Minister of Scotland, using the powers at my disposal to make a difference. Now, you raised 2 issues with me, James: council tax and the efficacy of our income tax proposals. The efficacy of our income tax proposals is that if we hadn't taken those steps on income tax, we'd have a budget that was £1.5 billion lower at our disposal than we have today. And that is a very big, hard reality. That is a substantial amount of expenditure that we'd have to, 1.5 billion is of the order of what we invest. We invest just slightly more than that in our universities and colleges, just to put it all into perspective. So if the Scottish Government wasn't prepared to do the difficult stuff to invest in the public finances, and I've been totally candid with the public, I've been candid with journalists, I was candid in election debates in the summer. Tax had to increase to support investment in our public finances. We took the decisions over a number of years to do so. The UK government has now taken some decisions in that respect. I don't think they've gone about it in a particularly efficacious way, but that's their choice. So I think what we've done has been to invest in our public finances and our public services, and to recognise that. And then on the council tax, I recognise the deep problems with the council tax, but I also recognise there's not, and maybe that's a point that that I need to take further in relation to the substance of my speech today. There's not been an awful lot of consensus about how to fix it, and those 2 things rather go together. That we might believe there's a problem with the council tax, but we'll have to find a consensus about how to fix it. And that's one of those issues where, again, we're engaged with the local government about how best to go about that. We've brought forward proposals in the past that did not command a parliamentary majority, so I have to respect democracy. I am a respecter of democracy. So there will be limitations to what we can do in that respect. But I think in the spirit of what I'm trying to set out to you today, there must be space for us to address the difficult issues in public policy, and I commit myself to making sure that we can do that. Lucia.
Lucia Walker, Channel 4 News. First Minister, taking into account the challenges of the last 7 years, the Scottish Human Rights Commission has published a report today stating that Scotland has breached its basic human rights obligations in the Highlands and Islands. They say the issues of health, food, housing and cultural life are not being prioritised by this government in these areas. Is the government prioritising and committing to the most urgent needs of people beyond the Central Belt?
I would contend that we are, by the nature of the investment that we are making in the economic, social and cultural life of our communities. I explicitly accepted and reflected in the fact that we have different and diverse geographies around the country. And some of what the government is trying to do is to respond to the challenges of those different elements of geography We're exploring, for example, with our island communities, the opportunities of single island authority governance so that they could have more responsibility and autonomy within their own island communities. We obviously have, in relation to the distribution of resources, particular mechanisms that take account of rurality and island circumstances. So those are reflected in the local government finance formula that we take forward. So there will be a variety of interventions that we make to try to address those points. But we must always be alert to and attentive to the issues that are raised by organisations like the Human Rights Commission. Where there is legitimate challenge, we have to respond to that in government, and we will respond to that because, as I committed to when I became First Minister 6 months ago, I am here to serve all of Scotland, to be the First Minister for the whole of Scotland, and I want to make sure that every community feels their inclusion in the policy agenda of the Scottish Government, and I commit myself to doing that. Thank you. Right, that's the broadcast questions over. Thank you all very much. I'll speak to print journalists just in a moment, but can I thank you all very much indeed for being here today, and I look forward to advancing many of the themes that I've talked about today in the conversations that we take forward as a result of today. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Royal Society.